For centuries, people thought that consciousness was one single unified thing, but that seems to be false. This is Ned Block, professor at NYU. Back in '95, he realized that scientists and philosophers were making one huge mistake. They thought that they had unraveled the mystery of consciousness, but in reality, they had only solved one piece of the puzzle, and the biggest problem of all remains to be solved. It seems actually to be the case that consciousness comes in 4 distinct types, each with its unique traits. But what are these traits, and which animals possess them, and could a machine ever be said to be conscious? So, let's go through these 4 different kinds of consciousness. Let's begin with what is called monitoring consciousness. This idea was introduced by one of my favorite philosophers, David Armstrong, and it occurs when you are having a mental state about another mental state. For instance, if I believe that I fear Lego, then I'm having a belief, a mental state, about my fear, another mental state. This is sometimes referred to as a second-order mental state, a mental state about another mental state. This is actually not self-consciousness, but we'll get to that later. To elaborate, think of meditation. A common way of meditating is fixing one's attention upon one thing. It can be a certain sensation, like the breath, or sounds. But if you're a bad meditator, like myself, you sometimes drift off into other thoughts. But importantly, we humans have the capacity to realize this. In other words, have a thought about thoughts and redirect the attention. When this occurs, you're having a higher order thought. The philosopher David Rosenthal is a contemporary proponent of this kind of theory. He writes, "A state being conscious is a matter of mental appearance, of how mental life appears to one. If somebody is in a mental state but doesn't seem subjectively to be in that state, the state is not conscious. The higher order thought, HOT, theory explains that subjective awareness is due to one's having a thought that one is in the state." Now, I believe that Rosenthal would claim that that is the end of the story of consciousness. We need no further explanation than that. I do not agree, but we'll get to that later. Now, which entities possess this kind of consciousness? Humans, indeed, but also it seems that quite a lot of animals are capable of this kind of metacognition. For instance, certain great apes, dolphins, elephants, and even certain corvids. But actually, it seems as though a normal laptop is capable of monitoring its own program and registering whenever a certain activity is occurring. It is capable of having a second order, well, not thoughts, but you get what I'm saying. But would we say that a laptop is conscious? Certainly not. There is more to be said about the nature of consciousness. But I want to stress that monitoring consciousness is not the same as the next kind that I want to discuss, which is self-consciousness. I myself made this mix-up in one of my older videos, but it's excusable because I am actually not sure whether self-consciousness actually exists. But we'll get to that. It is commonly claimed that humans and maybe some animals possess self-consciousness, but in order to be self-conscious, one must possess a concept of one being a continuous self. What the self is, I believe to be a big debate within philosophy, but for instance, here the 17th century philosopher John Locke writes, A thinking, intelligent being that has reason and reflection and can consider itself as itself the same thinking thing in different times and places. What Locke is getting at is that the self is defined as a continuous stream of consciousness that perceives itself to be the same stream over time. With this conception of the self, it seems as though not many animals would qualify as being self-conscious. Maybe even only humans. There is the famous mirror test, where mirrors were placed near animals, and after some time the animals displayed behavior that they seem to understand that it is in fact themselves they are seeing in the mirror. So there seems to be some kind of consciousness of oneself, but does that really qualify according to Locke's definition? I would say that it is something different to recognize oneself in the mirror and to think of oneself as the same entity across time. Is there a way to test whether an animal possesses this trait? I don't know. Now, a problem here is, does the self actually exist? Because according to many Eastern traditions of philosophy, they claim that the self is an illusion. The brain is just a bunch of neurons firing, so there is no identity to talk about really. The idea of the self is just another idea like any other within the stream of consciousness. And if that is the case, self-consciousness doesn't really exist, and it collapses down into monitoring consciousness. Because if the self doesn't exist, it is merely a thought itself, which only makes it a thought about another thought. So this whole idea hinges upon the existence of the self. But what do you guys think? Does the self exist? But now, let's discuss what Ned Block refers to as access consciousness. Take this belief. I believe that Stockholm is the capital of Sweden. I know, it should be Helsingborg, but there's nothing I can do about that, unfortunately. Anyways, according to Block, this belief is accessible to me if 1. Is inferentially promiscuous, and 2. It's poised for rational control of speech, and 3. It's poised for rational control of action. Inferentially promiscuous means that I am able to use it as a premise in basically any argument, such as, everyone who's living in the capital of Sweden is stupid. Stockholm is the capital of Sweden. Therefore, everyone living in Stockholm is stupid. A fine argument, right? Rational control of speech, on the other hand, refers to if you ask me the question, what is the capital of Sweden? The correct information is accessible to me if I can provide you with the answer. And lastly, rational control of action means that if you ask me to show you what the capital of Sweden is, I am able to provide you with a Wikipedia link, for instance, or a book about Stockholm which claims that it is in fact the capital of Sweden. Block claims that the second one is not a necessary criterion, for instance, because it seems as though some chimps, which can't talk right, could still be access conscious. But let's talk about AI for a moment, because it seems as though a system like ChatGPT possesses access consciousness. It certainly ticks all the boxes provided by Block, right? If I ask ChatGPT, it is able to tell me what the capital of Sweden is, and it is even able to provide me with a link that proves it. And obviously, it can use it in any argument. But would we really say that ChatGPT is conscious? No, because I argue that it lacks the most important kind of consciousness, which is phenomenal consciousness. I would probably say that phenomenal consciousness is what probably what most people think of when they hear the word consciousness. It is the having of an experience, a property of having what it is likeness. If we have two people enjoying a lovely sunset, but one of them is colorblind, then these two people have different phenomenal experiences. They have different properties of what it is likeness. But the concepts of access and phenomenal consciousness are very commonly conflated. But I think the easiest way to distinguish access from phenomenal consciousness is through AI, actually. If I ask ChatGPT, it can provide me with all the relevant information about chocolate. It is even able to give me a description of how it tastes. It is access conscious about chocolate. But now, has the large language model actually tasted chocolate? Has it put it in its mouth and felt the sweet sensation of chocolate? No, it has never possessed the actual phenomenal quality of chocolate. It is access conscious about all its qualities, but all these qualities are received from second-hand sources. It simply doesn't really know how it tastes, even if it is able to provide me with a correct, accurate description of the taste. But I guess some might reply and say that access consciousness, and indeed all the other traits of consciousness that I've been describing in this episode, is not really consciousness. The only thing that is consciousness is phenomenal consciousness. But the funny thing is that many philosophers claim that it is the same thing. This was the point of Block's article that we discussed in the beginning of this episode. Many authors in various texts begin to claim that they have an explanation of phenomenal consciousness, while all of a sudden they slide into an explanation of access consciousness. So I think that we should really thank Ned Block for the separation between phenomenal and access consciousness. Now, here is why I believe these four different concepts of consciousness exist. Because it seems that different entities possess different kinds of consciousnesses. We humans possess all these four traits, for instance. But most likely, few animals possess self-consciousness. But some animals seem to possess a degree of monitoring consciousness. But so do computers. And when it comes to access consciousness, we're most likely talking about humans and chimps and possibly some other highly evolved creatures. But also various AI models, right? But when it comes to phenomenal consciousness, I would say that probably most animals do possess it. There is something that it is like to be a bat, for instance. But no AI, at least not that I'm aware of at the moment, do possess this trait. This is one of the factors that make phenomenal consciousness one of the biggest mysteries within philosophy of mind. It is the hard problem of consciousness. So there is way more to be said about it. So that will be the subject for the next episode here on the channel. So if that sounds interesting, make sure to subscribe. But can consciousness really be four different things? I mean, it makes sense that it is, since it seems plausible that various things possess different kinds of consciousness. But maybe it is only one thing, and it's only a matter of complexity. When a creature or machine reaches a certain complexity level, it gains these various traits on the way. Maybe there's even a higher level of consciousness that even we humans do not possess. But what do you guys think? Leave a comment down below. I would love to hear your thoughts. But that's it for today, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in another episode. Bye.